we can get going, but I'm happy to give it a few more minutes.
Well, let's start. People can
Okay. All
figure out what's
right.
going on if they join late.
Okay. Well, for the record, this is the October 10th, 2024 meeting of the Vermont Climate Council Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee. We're going to be from 10 to about noon today. Um, Draft agenda has been posted. Um, what we're planning to cover today for the kind of first half of the meeting are some updates from the kind of administrative and facilitation staff on the CAP process and the stakeholder sessions that we're going to host, later in the fall, and really needing to nail down some dates for those. We're going to hopefully have Abby Willard, our Just Transitions liaison, lead us through an overview of the updated guiding principles. We'll break for some public comment. And then we will focus on our task groups and refresh our expectations around kind of timeline and deliverables. And make sure that those task groups have a plan to kind of get up and going with that work if they haven't already, and then share any updates, do a little bit more public comment, and then talk about next steps and be on our way for the day. So with that, any additions, questions to the agenda, or should we consider that good to go? All right, great. All right. So with that, I think we're waiting on actually Liz and David and Sophie. I saw them in another meeting just down the hall earlier. I think that's our first agenda item. So I might want to pause real quick, and I can just go tell them to shift over to this meeting. How does that sound? Once you all talk amongst yourselves, I'll be right back.
Well, I want to know if the folks here, if you've all been able to get into um the state emails and access those documents and everything. I know there was technical issues around that. Jake, were you able to get that email set up? The partnership email?
I still need to do some follow-up to get that working myself. So yeah, but it's on my docket for today to take care of. So
Okay. And Earl, you need help. Okay, Stephen, how's it going for you?
Yeah, so I wasn't able to just to sending the verification code back to them, able to get in. So I guess I'm probably gonna need to get somebody directly on the line from up there to walk me through it. Evan did send me the templates in a Word doc, which was great. So had a little bit of time at least to review those before today.
Okay. Evan, I don't know who they need to speak to help with those email setups. Could you send them all an email?
Yeah, I have. I've
Okay.
shared information about contacting ADS and IT here, but I'm happy to, if you want to, if anyone wants to reach out to me directly, I can support that and help them through it.
Okay. Thank you. You,
Yeah, sorry, I just spoke with Sophie, and she is in the process of joining us, and we'll get going with our first agenda item once she joins. Hey, Sophie, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I know my audio on Zoom is not the best, so if you give me a minute, I can get my phone so that everybody can hear me better.
Okay, you sound okay to me, but whatever is going to work for you. It's great.
Okay, if this is okay for people, then I can continue. Okay,
I
all
think
right,
so.
thanks. Um, and do we have David? Is David here?
I don't see him though.
Okay, so I am here to share a couple things about the input sessions with you. Um, hopefully, we can have a conversation today about scheduling them and what the topic areas are. A heads up that we do have the cross-sector mitigation input sessions scheduled and the rural resilience input sessions scheduled. And because of the nature of sort of like promote how we promote them, it would be really great if we could get the schedule for these ones figured out today and what the topic areas are, so I can get to work making sure that they can happen and we can get a lot of people you want to hear from there. And I'm happy, I'm guessing Billy and Jael that you'll lead that conversation, but I don't know if there's any questions in advance of diving into that discussion that people want to ask and have any further context on.
So oh, go ahead, Jael. I'm sorry. Were you going to say something?
No, I think you're going to probably ask the same question I was, so go ahead.
I don't actually have a specific question, so you can go for it.
I'm sorry, Sophie, can you remind me and maybe the whole group what the topic or how to choose the topic? It's out of the pathways to basically decide which that the two public comment groups will be focused on one of those. Can you just go over it again? Like what? Thank you.
Yeah, so it's kind of up to your subcommittee, but I can give some helpful examples of how it could go. So I know you have task groups. I think you have three. Um, and so, one idea is like, oh, there could be one input session per task group. I think that came up last meeting where there was interest from folks in, oh, maybe we could do three. That is possible if you wanted to do it that way, but just know that the Consensus Building Institute and Climate Action Office like support availability for helping a third one to happen. We only have capacity to support you on two. So if you wanted to do a third, you'd kind of have to like manage that on your own. And obviously I would be able to like put that up on the website and all of that good stuff to make sure that it like matches everything. But just understand that there's limited capacity. So what we can help you sort of like promote and facilitate and provide the agenda for is two. So that's one way of doing it. If you can kind of bucket your subject matter nicely into two subtopics, that's another option. So that's kind of what cross-sector mitigation did. They chose buildings and thermal as one topic and transportation as another. Their third task group is electricity, and both of those topics have electricity components to them. So they're going to kind of integrate the electrification aspects into those two meetings. And I think they probably chose buildings and thermals and transportation also because there's like the biggest need there for emissions reduction. So they kind of did some prioritization. So that's one example of how another subcommittee bucketed it into two. Another way of thinking about it is how rural resilience and adaptation is doing it. So both of their meetings are going to cover the content from all three of their task groups. So it's going to be the same content, but they're targeting different audience groups for those two meetings. So the discussions and the conversation are going to look a little different. So you can think of like their presentation is going to be the same. They're going to cover, public health, and I think compact settlement is one of them. So they're going to cover all the things they've been talking about in both meetings. But one is inviting municipal support organizations and hearing their perspective. And then the other is inviting small, medium businesses and business support organizations. So hopefully that gives you like a range of what's possible. There's not necessarily one way to do it, but hopefully that helps give a little more like guideline and guardrail substance around it.
Thanks, Sophie. That's super helpful. So we've got two opportunities for two facilitated meetings. We've got three general topics that we're covering. I think last time we talked about maybe dealing with, um, I'm trying to remember how we talked about last time, but so, we can either have different meetings topically, or we can have similar meetings that are focused on different groups of stakeholders. Um, I know last time we talked about trying to have potentially farm and forest landowners and managers as kind of one stakeholder group, but certainly open to others' thoughts on how you'd like to proceed, given what Sophie just presented. I think we do need to make a final decision today on when we're going to have these meetings and generally how they're going to be structured so that we can get those scheduled and invitations out and things of that nature. So, any thoughts from the group on how best you would like to proceed with these opportunities? Okay. Reminder, our task groups, the first is related to uh, greenhouse gas reduction and sequestration in ag and forestry. It's really an emissions management focus. The second is how we support adaptation, viability, recovery, and economies and workforce across natural working lands. And the third is climate resilient land use and conservation. So, what sorts of land use decisions and practices on the working and natural lands can drive resilience? Um, Given everything that we've been seeing in, the flooding and droughts and other extreme weather we've seen affecting our farm and forest businesses over the past few years, it may make sense to have one of these really focus on kind of resilience for those sectors, both, economic and otherwise, and get feedback on them on what sorts of actions are priorities from their perspectives, both around kind of business and land practices. So that may be one we want to consider. I see Ryan, you've got your hand up.
Sure. Yeah, I just I think it would be great to solicit input from folks that are interested in this topic, as you just suggest. As far as educate, I think we can ask for folks. I think a degree of briefing or education might be useful ahead of time for the task one group. I'd be more than happy to walk them through what the GWSA says about, emission reductions and whatever else, and talk about the progress farms have made and adopting practices, and can talk about that framework. So depending on, whether you want to focus on a specific sector, and how they're approaching it, happy. I think that could be a fine way to have some segments to talk about different parts of the land, or it also, could be useful to have an open-ended discussion about natural working lands and what people want to see for resilient strategies. So there's too much to cover, so we are going to have to narrow. So I don't know how we're going to do that, but the 4 task groups covering between 2 meetings could work as well. Just some random ideas.
Other thoughts?
There's like the Connecticut River Farmers Alliance, or the two, and I think there's the Farmer Alliance up in Champlain area. So I really want to get more farmers involved and on board as much as possible to just add input and hear the plans. So I don't know how we can, get the word out to those groups. Jake?
Yeah, see what Jake has to say, and then I've got some thoughts.
Yeah, just clarifying the possible proposals to decide between is, I think, Billy, what you were just saying is like one approach to getting the 3 themes into 2 meeting. So that's like a more the the frame focus is more on the themes, um, and one of those would be kind of bringing together themes 2 and 3, which are kind of based around adaptation resilience. And then the other meeting would be on theme 1, which is more greenhouse gas emissions, um, reductions and sequestration. And then the other framing focus would be have a more like sector or audience orientation of like we want to reach farmers on each of these 3 themes. So we're gonna have one meeting for them, and then we really want to reach like forestry and other land managers on those 3 in another meeting. So does that feel like the like two that feels like the 2 real choices that we're discussing right now?
I think so. Yeah. Like either we do it by subject matter, break it up by subject matter, or break it up by kind of uh, stakeholder focus.
Yeah.
Um,
And yeah, Jael, just hearing what you just said is like, if we really want like farmers or people in the forestry industry, like that's our intended audience. Like, would we be more effective if that's our focus, um, of like we want to hear from you, or can we embed that into the outreach of a more theme oriented approach of like we want to hear people in this industry's thoughts on these themes, but we're really going to focus outreach on like making sure that farmers and farm associations are really participating in that. So that's kind of like the debate in my own head of like, yeah, what's going to be most effective in ensuring that like we get those intended audiences to come out. And yeah, does the orientation of the theme or sector focus make a difference in that happening?
yeah, I didn't see. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, I agree. Those are great questions. I didn't see if Andrew or Marley had their hand up first, so you guys can figure out who wants to talk.
It was definitely Andrew.
All right, Andrew, go for it.
All right. Thank you. So I don't think my camera's working, so I apologize for that. But I think what Jake just laid out, I think either option could work. I kind of like the idea of separating out the mitigation and then the adaptation and resilience, doing it in those 2 groups, because those are sort of clear themes that would bring different people to the table that might be interested. But I guess one of my main comment is these are going to have to be sessions where there is some really well organized introduction to the material before we ask for input, because I'm just within theme 3, there's 80 strategies and actions. And to expect the public to meaningfully have input on that, I think, the kind of input or introduction that Ryan was just talking about is going to be really important. And, are we really expecting them to have input at the strategy and action level, or is it more general? Because at the strategy or action level, could be pretty overwhelming. It's hard enough to do with a group of 2 or 3. So that's my main thoughts on it. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. And just before we go to Marley, just to kind of pause on that thought, I think part of the intent with these meetings from the council, my understanding is that the hope is that subcommittees will have kind of done some initial prioritization and could bring those initial thoughts to these stakeholders. So, I think the hope would be that we will have kind of winnowed down that very large list of actions that we currently have under our purview to something that looks more like a short list to bounce off these stakeholders to see if we're kind of directionally in the right spot. So that's a lot to ask. I know, we're a little bit behind schedule. The task groups are just kind of getting going on that work, but I think that would be the intent, is to bring something like a short list of actions and strategies forward for these conversations. Marley.
Great. Thank you.
Andrew, do you have more follow-up?
Yeah, sorry, I
Nope.
didn't mean to cut you off.
Nope. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I just had a couple thoughts on it from how to approach this. With all respect, I think I might disagree a little bit with Andrew on if the decision is whether to separate these meetings out based on subject matter or based on stakeholders. I'm leaning more towards stakeholders. Personally, I don't think most farmers care whether it's sequestration, mitigation, adaptation, resilience. It's not because they don't understand it, but it doesn't matter as much. And so I suggest probably we might get better response if we have an overview of the big picture, but more stakeholder based. And with regards to that, I'm not sure if, oh, Stephen, you just put it into the chat what I was going to say, but a couple years ago, the three farmers coalitions pulled together a meeting of farmers. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it had to do with the climate action plan, the first one that we developed. Can't really remember, but it was incredibly well attended because they coordinated it and they asked people to come. And I really hope that we can try and connect with these groups, coordinate with them, have them help us share the information, but do it at their convenience as well, whether that's at another meeting they already have planned that we go to, or something else. Just a plain cold call, 4 o'clock in the afternoon when people are either still out in the vegetable gardens doing something important or in the barn milking cows is going to be a challenge to get a really good attendance at. So Ryan certainly does as well, but as staff, I'm more than happy to help coordinate with these farmers coalitions if folks want to go that route. But that's more what I would suggest.
JL.
Yeah, Marley said exactly what I was going to say. I think that focusing more on like farmers, for farmers and even like foresters, but keeping all the focus topics together. And then, I mean, I would like to bring in more of a piece around, indigenous wisdom, and maybe that could be the public that theme, public engagement, and we could have Earl and Judy help us like figure out who to invite for that one.
So are you thinking there'd be a meeting just focused on farmers, or would that be kind of farm and forest, and then like a meeting for everybody else, or it would be kind of a meeting focused on farmers, given the real impacts they've been seeing, and then another meeting that's just more general for all the other interests?
Yeah, I think of a meeting focused on people who earn a living, from the land, that be that farmers or foresters. And I know that um, they're kind of different and sometimes competing interests, but since we can only do two, I think we should have the people who are relying on the land in the first group, and then the general public in the second group, but focus more on like the the way that I'm forgetting. My brain is so tired from this long week I had, but indigenous knowledge around land use.
Yeah, okay. Others thoughts on that, Stephen?
Yes, just wanted to really agree with Jael. I think my brain right away goes to thinking of farmers and how to outreach to the farming community, but I think it is of equal importance that we bring in the forestry sector, both loggers and foresters and landowners, and finding a way to get more cross communication going there, and also recognizing that so many of the farm owners are also managing significant woodland as well. And so that it's really, in many cases, speaking to folks who are stewarding both agricultural and forestry resources at the same time.
Right. So, one way to do this is to have one meeting that's kind of focused on um, individuals and in organizations that manage farms, forests, other kind of economy-based systems, and then another meeting that's focused more on kind of natural land and TEK policy and things like that. That might be and obviously there's a lot of overlap. Folks who own and manage farms and forest lands are also involved in conservation and whatnot. But I think we can still, there's probably some distinctions that we can make in preparing for those, um, and still cover a lot of the same stuff in both meetings, but have the stakeholder invitations be focused more in those ways. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, so Billy, Marley's saying that she could help us if we wanted to do 3 meetings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, would it be easier if we just said, okay, we're going to do 3 or do we want to try and keep it? Do we have the capacity, I guess, to do 3 or do we want to keep it at 2?
Yeah, I think that's a question back to this group, right? I'm happy to try to participate as much as I can in all these things, but I do think the intent is that we have a reasonable representation of subcommittee members present at these meetings. So if folks are game to do that and participate in 3 of these in addition to your task groups and these meetings and whatnot, we can certainly do that. If that's starting to stretch us a little bit thin, then I think we can. The other tack is we could say we've got 2. Our most important constituents are kind of landowners and managers of farm and forest land. Not, and that includes, forest lands that aren't necessarily managed for extractive products, people who just own or manage lands in Vermont. And we're going to have one that's focused more on kind of the farm side, understanding that those farmers also have significant forested acres, and one that's focused more on the forestry kind of extractive and not side. And then anyone's welcome to participate in these who don't fit into those categories, but that's how we're going to use our limited facilitation resources to focus on those communities. So that's another way to approach this. But if folks want to do 3, we can certainly explore. I'm just mindful of everything that we got going on right now.
I guess I'm just also mindful that, oh, I'm sorry, Jake, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead.
Okay. I was just gonna say I like that framing, Billy, and yeah, I do worry about like taking on another session that may just may like stress our limited capacity and may not like deliver on expectations. And I think the way that you've outlined that idea of like it's open, but we're putting a focus around forestry and farming for the 2 sessions. And within each of those, the notion is like it could be extractive or economic, or it could be otherwise. And that I think helps to kind of fulfill, I think, what is a desire. I'm hearing a desire of like just making sure we get, also kind of like an element of public input that's not just like an industry mindset for each of those.
Yeah. And Earl, thanks for that comment. I think we could certainly also do an additional meeting kind of focused on kind of Abenaki and other kind of native peoples in Vermont, where maybe we ask them to join one of these meetings, or we go to one of their standing meetings, and have a focused conversation with them about their interests and the kind of experience that they bring to these issues. I think that might be an easier thing to schedule since I believe there is a group that meets fairly regularly from those folks. So, Earl, thanks for that suggestion. And, I think I would take that as a friendly amendment to what we're talking about to have a third meeting that was maybe not these larger public gatherings, but a really focused meeting with the Abenaki community around their input on our work. Marley?
Earl, do you want to follow up on this subject any further? Okay. Guess. Didn't know if you wanted to say anything else about this, Earl, before I got in.
No, I'd just say I really appreciate your willingness and thank you. It would be better if we could meet without these other two groups where we could speak freely about everything related to this committee and have a chance to let you know where we're coming from without being around the forestry industry or whatever. We'd like to be able to speak freely with you. You could call it consultation. Um, and, it would include, all the Benekis that, represent the groups and the traditional families. We could see how we could get that organized if y'all were willing. Maloney.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. So Jael and I can think about the best way to kind of fit that into our schedule, and we'll work with you, Earl, if that's okay to help get that set up. Great.
I think what Earl is suggesting is
Can't get
actually
my
what.
mute
Oh no,
off
go
the,
ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
I just wanted to say thank you and I appreciate your willingness so we can talk about that on the side and see how we can organize that. Yeah.
Super. Well, thanks for suggesting that.
Actually, what Earl was suggesting is very similar to what I was going to say in another area, which is I don't know if this is the place for it or not, Jael, Billy, Sophie, but at some point, can we talk about other ways to do outreach other than just big public meetings? Are there other meetings that we can go to just share some information, especially if we're going to have a shorter winnowed down list to be able to share with people by the time we get to this public meeting? There are plenty of other ways to get input from the agricultural and the forestry committee communities, other than just a couple big public meetings. So I'd really like to talk more about that sometime as well.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that, Marley. And just kind of like a contextual piece and a reminder for everyone is that, I think unlike the initial climate action plan where the subcommittees were really like generating the content, and the council, the climate council themselves had a fairly limited amount of time with it at the end to kind of like tweak it and finalize it. I think the process that the council is undertaking now really provides this window for subcommittees to do some initial prioritization kind of through the end of this year. And then for the next 6 months, the council is going to be working to finalize those priorities. And there's going to be a significant amount of outreach and engagement, I would imagine, kind of through the council in that work. So it doesn't end with what we're doing. That it's actually going to kind of expand, I think, once they have that short list to work off of. But that said, Marley, I think we can certainly figure out ways to still incorporate additional stakeholder input in the work that we're doing before the end of the year. Great. Stephen.
Just in response to Marley, it's occurred to me that it would be really tremendous if, given our short window, even if it would be possible to hold some on-site public meetings where the public and policymakers could be invited to specific sites where agroecological farming practices are being implemented through CSP and other initiatives that we already have in place, and also examples of ecological forest management. I know we not that we're a stellar example, we're just a work in progress, but here at Cedar Mountain Farm at Cobble. We would certainly we welcome a lot of groups. Would be very open to having that kind of a gathering take place here, where we've implemented a lot of agroforestry projects over the last 5 years, in addition to having been an organic farm for 25 years.
Thanks, Stephen. Sounds like a great opportunity. All right. So in the interest of somewhat adhering to our agenda here, do we feel like we're in a reasonable place in that we're going to have these two meetings focused roughly on kind of farm and forestry interests, appreciating that anyone can attend them, but that's going to be the kind of targeted stakeholders. And then we're going to work with Earl to set up a separate conversation with the Abenaki community. And okay, so looks like we're good with that. What more do you need from us, Sophie? Do we need to nail down some dates right now?
Yes, please. And
Okay.
it's like kind of the latest week to hold these is the week of the 11th. So if you want to look out that far, that's totally fine. And maybe that's a little helpful in terms of thinking about your task group work timeline. You'll have a month to, I mean, a little less than a month because you want to have the content developed a little bit in advance of the meeting, but
yeah,
maybe that timeline's helpful too.
I would recommend we look as far out as possible. So are these typically like evening meetings, or what is there any kind of recommendation that we've got about how or when to schedule these?
I think thinking, especially since your meetings will be audience specific, topic specific, and that goes along with people's lifestyles, I think it would be important to think about what timing works well for farmers, what timing works well for people who are managing or work primarily in the woods. And choose your times based on that would be the best approach. And obviously you need to have a certain number of you all able to attend and be there. So that's a factor as well.
Those who work closely with farm and forest people, what's your suggestion? Evening, first thing in the morning, 5 a.m.? Okay, evening, Jael?
Evening.
Okay.
Not too late, but yeah.
All right,
Cows need to be milked early in the morning, so.
Do you want to just suggest a time so then we can have something to start with? And Steven's got his hand up also. He might have some thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to be contradictory to Jael, but most of us dairy farmers, we get up early in the morning, but we also go to bed early at night because we get up early in the morning. So generally find that midday works really well in terms of bookending, being bookended by chores on either side of the day. But having said that, would definitely be amenable to attending evening meetings.
So maybe a lunch meeting, is that what you're suggesting?
Generally midday works better for us. I don't know if that's across the board for other dairy farmers, but that's what we find. I know, like my wife, who does most of the morning milking, she's in bed by 8 o'clock at night.
I wonder if something like 4 p.m. would. No, never mind.
No, I think either evening, like JL's suggesting 6:30, or literally the middle of the day, noonish, as Stephen says. And frankly, in November, I think that's when you're looking at the week of November 11th. Doing it in the middle of the day is probably going to be better received. There's, most field work's done for the most part. So.
Okay. Well, why don't we think about this? Well, one meeting, the ag focus meeting in the middle of the day, the other meeting in the early evening, and then, we're going to be covering a lot of the same information. So folks will have options temporally when they can participate.
Sorry, Billy, I was reading a chat message, but are we talking about 3 meetings or just 2?
Just 2 of these kind of broader
Public,
facilitated.
and then one with reaching out to the Abenaki community.
Yeah, we'll schedule that kind of outside of this conversation. Yeah. So how's that sound, two meetings during the week of November 11th, one midday, one kind of early evening. Okay.
And both of those, I'm sorry, I'm not following. Both of those are for the ag and forestry community,
I
two for the
think,
ag and forestry communities.
yeah, I think we said one focused on kind of ag interests, one focused on forestry and kind of natural land interests, understanding that there's overlap.
I just want to flag Andrew's comment in the chat as well. That not just farm and forest, but also partners and technical service providers and those who work with them.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so I'm looking at the week of the 11th. Um, I am personally looking at either midday or evening. I can do any day that week except for Friday when I have to be down in Boston for a conference. So, um, I don't know if it makes sense. I think I think Sophie needs us to pick dates today. So, any thoughts on people's availability either Monday through Thursday of that week at midday or in the evening? Steven says they're all good. Anyone else? What's that mean, Marley? I'm sorry.
It meant I was muted and I needed to
Oh,
turn my mic back on.
okay.
Obviously, my attendance is less important than others, but as far as staffing and helping, I can only do Monday and Tuesday that week. I can't
Okay.
change other commitments. Sorry.
And November 11th, was that Veterans Day?
Yeah, I just realized November 11th is a holiday. But I don't think much will be needed in terms of like staff support from like subcommittee staff support. Happy to be in touch. But in terms of like facilitation and all sort of the background work, we've got this covered for here.
Okay. So with the holidays and me, and I'm not totally critical to this, but I want to help support it. So I'm not there Friday. So with Monday and Friday out, any constraints people have either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday of that week at midday or in the evening?
I'm available all those days.
Okay.
Again, I'm not on Wednesday or Thursday during the day, but I can do the
Right.
evenings.
Okay. But you are available Tuesday during the day.
Correct.
Y'all want to do Tuesday for midday farmers and then Wednesday or Thursday for the evening? Okay. Any preference, Wednesday or Thursday evening? All right, let's do Wednesday and just knock them out.
Nice.
So, okay. And Sophie, how long are these meetings typically?
Hour and a half.
Okay, so Tuesday, 11, 12, noon to 1:30.
Noon to 1:30. Great. And I'll send out I can send out calendar invitations to everybody, which will have like the Zoom link and all the details and everything. But yeah, helpful to have that in the held on your calendar currently because I'll get those on your calendar. So we've got Tuesday 12 to 1:30. Great.
And then Wednesday the 13th, what are the evening times that people are usually going with? Do you have any sense of that, Sophie?
Oh, sorry. I think a lot of the other ones have been during the day with other public meetings we've done, and this is for a broad audience, so I welcome your input on what would work best for these particular audience. I find that around 6 p.m. is kind of a good middle ground of not being too late, but also allowing folks who do work during daytimes to have a chance to get home. But maybe
Okay.
there's particular considerations for people who work in the woods.
Any thoughts for a 5:30, 6 o'clock start on Wednesday?
I think 6
Okay.
to 7:30.
Okay.
Earl, would that work for you on Wednesday?
It depends on the location.
It's on Zoom.
Oh, if it's on Zoom, yeah, fine.
Okay.
Okay, great. So I just put
Okay.
Thanks, Earl. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I appreciate you're not available Tuesday, but I think we should hopefully have that covered. I'm sure not all of us are going to be able to make all these.
Well, if
Um,
it's on Zoom, I guess I misunderstood. I thought
okay.
we are going to location. If it's on Zoom, I could probably be on for an hour before I have to jump to the next meeting that day.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, great. So I just put those in the chat, dates, times, and focus. So we'll follow up with more information on that and kind of what we need to do working back from that week of 11/11. But I think we've accomplished our first action item of the day that was necessary. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so
Any
much.
questions, comments before we move on?
Can we start sending this out to all the groups we're associated with, or is
So
there
I'll
an
help you out
invite?
with that. Kind of
Okay.
the next step. Yeah, this is helpful. I'll give a quick overview next step. So the subcommittees each generate sort of who do you want to be there. So I took notes from today of everything folks put in the chat about the farmers alliances, no for Vermont, rural Vermont. I know Farm to Plate has a great listserv. So I'll start out our stakeholder or invited parties list that way, and start to fill this in. This is on the SharePoint that you all have access to. I know there's some tech issues with that. So if you have ideas for who else should be invited, you can email them to me, Billy, Jael, and I will make sure they get added to the list. And I can take care of a lot of those invitations. If there's somebody that think you should really be the person to send that invitation, that's great. I'm really offering that like as a service, so you don't have to do too much work. But very happy to have you, send the outreach to particular parties. Who it would be nice for them to hear from you. So we can do that by email. And the other thing is that we've got a PowerPoint template. I know you have some other action items to get to today, so I'm not going to take your time going over that, but I can send that out. Welcome some feedback on it. It gives you sort of the flow of what the presentation part should look like. You fill in the content based on where your task group gets to. That's another resource we'll be providing. And we'll work with Consensus Building Institute with your input to develop the agenda, which will include kind of, extra notes about how things are going to go.
Great. So thank you. So if you could share that stuff, and then if there is going to be a Zoom invite, if you could share that with this full group, and then we can just forward those on to kind of people or organizations that we see fit, or communicate back to you, folks that would benefit from some outreach out of your office.
Yes, we'll be sending an email actually today. I'll be able to include this in this email that's going to go out to all climate counselors and subcommittee members that will say exactly that. And then you'll also get those calendar invitations from me, which will have the Zoom link and the website link in them.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Sounds like a good plan, and more information to come. All right. Moving on, let's see, we're at a point where we said we were going to break for public comment. I don't see any members of the public here, but we'll pause for a second to see if anyone is there lurking in the background who wants to share their comments. And if not, we're going to move on to Abby. So, okay. So sorry to be late, but we've got Abby Willard here, who's our trustee liaison from the Just Transition Subcommittee, and she's going to help walk us through some updates to how the guiding principles are being kind of communicated out of that group, and the council. So hand it over to you, Abby.
Thanks, Billy. Hi, everyone. As Billy said, I'm Abby Willard. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Just Transition Subcommittee of the Climate Council. I also work for the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And I just want to admit I haven't been able to attend a lot of these subcommittee meetings. And so apologies for not having kind of established the relationship and kind of built that liaison role as well as I could and should. So hoping to have more time and capacity in the coming months to do so. But appreciating the time on the agenda today to do a couple things, mostly to just kind of model what this liaison role can be, where as a member of the Just Transition Subcommittee and a liaison to this Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee, I plan to join as I can your subcommittee meetings and bring perspective, hold space, answer questions, whatever would be helpful around the Just Transition guiding principles or kind of considerations around equity and inclusion and centering of equity in the process that the subcommittee goes through. Today, in particular, we wanted to share a new tool that was recently developed by the Just Transition Subcommittee and how it came to be and how it can be useful, and then actually walk through the tool and talk about how it can be used by your subcommittee as you go through kind of the climate action plan updating process. So this visual tool is a new tool in addition to the original Just Transition Guiding Principles document that was created in what was it, 2020, I guess. I'm not looking at it right at the moment, but at the beginning of the climate action planning process. And I just want to look at the date because it's on my mind. So 2021, sorry. So August 2021, it was when the original Just Transition Guiding Principles was created. This last summer, Just Transition Subcommittee did a series of meetings with co-chairs to kind of run through how to use this tool to help kind of, again, center equity in the overall process and add some guiding questions and some considerations as you're going through the revision process. What became really clear and consistent feedback from those co-chair sessions was that the guiding principle document was long, it was confusing, and a simpler version would be easier and more useful for subcommittees in this kind of plan revision process. So that led to this new visual tool that we'll share in just a moment, and Billy and Jael shared in the meeting announcement. So maybe some of you have had a chance to look through it. But before I share the tool, I wanted to just do a tiny bit of context setting. So this won't take long, but just for a few moments. Many of us, I think, have been engaged in some kind of imaging exercises or imagining exercises. And so I just want to hold a little space for everybody to imagine and feel some sensations and some concepts in your body. So much of this language that I'm going to offer was provided by Just Transition Subcommittee members at our last meeting earlier this month. And I found these sentiments very grounding to me as sort of examples of why we're doing this work and why this incorporation of just transition considerations is really important. So hopefully this too can be valuable to you all. So just feeling and imagining that we're each here to contribute towards ensuring that we have a livable planet for the next generations. We will collectively make decisions to support the land we live on, the air we breathe, and the wise use and stewardship of our natural resources. We bring an inclusive community mindset to the process of developing these recommendations. We desire a community that helps one another, cares for each other, and reaches out and engages others. We recognize that we can't afford to leave anyone behind and that everyone's impact in this evolving climate matters. if one of us is found to be suffering, all of us feel that same suffering. And therefore, we can bring our full heart to this work and think about those that this work supports and those that may feel challenge or burden, and the goal to be a collective rising for everyone. So again, we all use different language and different words and different imagery to sort of place ourselves at the kind of the heart of this work. I know everyone on this call likely has more to do than they have time, and choosing to be engaged in this process is kind of a commitment to our future. And hopefully that starts to recenter us for a bit in why we may work to make even more time available and consideration for the just transition components. So in the chat, I just put the visual. Again, I think you've seen it or had the opportunity to access it from the meeting announcement, but if it's helpful to have it there, happy to share it. So I just want to go through how the document works, and hopefully that can be helpful in making it available for you all to use into the future. Is everybody able to open the document? Would it be helpful for me to do a screen share, or do you each just want to look at it on your own? That's kind of your practice in this committee.
Abby, I think some folks have some technical issues, so it may not hurt to just pull it up, just to walk through it as a screen share, if that's okay.
Yep, I'm happy to do that. I'm assuming that I can do a share. Let's see how this goes. Okay, can everybody see my screen and see the new visual tool up?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, so this is sort of and again, please interrupt me, kind of raise your hand, let me know if there's something about what I'm sharing that you have questions about. But this is designed to be like a little bit more user-friendly, streamlined, simplified tool that can hopefully be helpful at the various stages of this climate action plan revision process that each subcommittee is going through. So on this document, along the top are the five steps in the process. So the first three on this page, the fourth and fifth steps on page number 2. Then there are these various circles, which signify action areas for each subcommittee to consider as they work on updating your sections of the climate action plan. And then there are these kind of like bluish green rectangular boxes, and these include questions that come from the full Guiding Principles for a Just Transition self-assessment question document that have been pulled out and identified as most relevant at each stage or action step in the revision process. So again, instead of having to reference the full document, which the link to that full document is here if you want to pull that up as well, the idea was that we would identify some of the more critical or most appropriate questions to ask. Ask yourself as you go through the process. So I thought I could go through each of the different steps in process and talk about the actions and then the questions as appropriate. So the first step is likely already happened for ag and ecosystem. And if you find that you are able to go back and sort of make some space for some of this background work, I think it could be really valuable and appreciated. The action steps in this background work actually link to a few other documents that are active links in that, which is I put in the chat and here on the screen. So the first action would be to review the community engagement reports that our CBI partners prepare each quarter, and really take time to both read and feel and hear the concerns and questions and needs that have been expressed by the community members and then tallied up into these quarterly reports. And so, if you click on this link, I'm going to try. I have no idea how this will show up on the screen. Are you guys all able to then see what shows up? These are the various documents, and I'm assuming, Sophie, you may actually be even more familiar
Yeah,
with
I'll
where.
chime in. Just this page does have a lot on it beyond just the engagement reports.
Yeah.
You can easily find them using the search bar at the top. And if you put in engagement, then it should pull up only the engagement reports, which is a little easier than scrolling through everything to find them.
So yeah, so here's the latest quarter Q2, second quarter of 2024 community engagement report that the Climate Action Office and the CBI team produced. So you can open it and take a look. Let's see if I can go back. Great. It's amazing when technology works. And then I was just sort of zoomed in here a little bit. We recognize that like the whole benefit of having this community engagement effort that the Climate Action Office is leading and the CBI team is facilitating is that we all can't be in all these public places all at once. And so using these summary reports really helps synthesize sort of like what's being shared and heard and expressed as concerns within the community. The second action in the second circle is to look at the community considerations checklist. So again, I'm going to click on this. So this was adapted from some other resources and put together by a group of the Just Transition Subcommittee that just outlines the various groups of individuals that live in our communities and that may be or are likely impacted or may experience barriers as a result of some of the recommendations and actions that we kind of propose in the Climate Action Plan. And so the idea is to just sort of like bring voice and attention to the various groups and individuals and contemplate whether the impact on them is known and it is unfortunately a negative impact, or if it feels like it's not an impact, or that there's more research and need that it would be valuable in understanding the impact on these various groups of individuals. And so this was, again, another kind of resource to share in this visual plan. And then the last question, and again, Sophie's here and may have some input to share, but at various times we've been, I think, collectively afforded the opportunity that if there were questions or considerations that we wanted posed in various community engagement events, that we could share that with the Climate Action Office. At the time that we created this document, we had a time frame of like by the early August to be able to get those questions to Sophie. But I'm curious, Sophie, does that still feel relevant that if there's questions and things that subcommittee members are wanting to see asked or answered during community engagement meetings?
I think I think they should basically come from your input session. So there's no need to kind of like do a different thing. Like at this stage, you're going to be creating discussion questions for those input sessions, and we'll be aware of those. And if we do go out to events, the reason why it was August is because most of the sort of like on the ground stuff we were doing was summer and a little bit into September. But we will here and there be going out to various groups over the winter too. So we can just use the questions you develop for your input session. No need to do something else.
That makes sense. So the two different input sessions that you all just scheduled in November would be a great place to kind of sub in for kind of this action as probably even a more direct way to connect with the ag and forestry community. So then I was going to move to steps 2 and 3, unless there was kind of a question or reaction to the first background piece. Okay, so steps 2 and 3 are where like a lot of the work happens, which is, and probably the phase that kind of ag and ecosystem is currently in, which is reviewing your existing strategies and assessing gaps in developing new or revising strategies. And so the actions here that would be to consider would be continuing the reflection on the engagement feedback that comes from the input sessions or that has been outlined in the community engagement summary reports. Consider attending outreach events to hear the reactions and the concerns and considerations directly, which again, I think the input sessions will provide a really great space for that, where you'll have some real one-on-one, albeit virtual, time with kind of the industry sectors that you represent. And then for the first kind of time in this tool, this is where these kind of identified specific questions come into play. And again, these are pulled directly from the guiding principles for a just transition self-assessment questions, but are a little bit reframed and again, designed to be really targeted at this phase. So these even could be important questions to consider as you're designing the topics for discussion in your input sessions. So examples of these would be, how have different communities experienced inequity? Who's designed to or may benefit from the strategies or the action items within your section of the climate action plan? Which communities would be burdened by the current strategies? How have frontline and impacted communities been involved in developing the strategies so their voices have been directly heard and considered? What additional resources are needed to implement these various recommendations? And have recommendations been written in plain language? So this whole link here of plain language appendix, and I guess I'll go here also, includes some really great resources that you can explore around considering plain language, both structure to your recommendations and how you discuss and communicate the work that you're doing. I will say from the Just Transition Subcommittee, this has been a really common and omnipresent kind of conversation within our subcommittee meetings of how do we make this information and the resources and the conversations more accessible. And so there's some great resources here around how to, again, communicate in plain language, short sentences, not using jargon, certainly not using acronyms, and really making the information and the concepts accessible. Acknowledging how complex kind of climate change and climate strategies for the future really are. So that's the review of strategies stage and kind of recommended steps. Then moving to step 4, which would be the stakeholder events that would happen into the fall that you guys just kind of went through the process of scheduling. So the action being offering suggestions for additional stakeholder outreach events in your community or within the area of interest, and consider attending, as well as the 2 input sessions that were just scheduled. The question of interest here to really consider is, as was outlined above in steps 2 and 3, is like, how have you really reached and intentionally included frontline and impacted communities in this outreach? And so I know you talked about that a bit in your first agenda item, but really thinking about how do we ensure that not just the location being virtual and the timing being varied and the days and time of year being appropriate, but like, what's the additional outreach efforts to make sure that the right impacted and potentially burdened communities are aware of the sessions and can attend? So I know that there have been some lists generated and that Sophie shared with the Just Transition Subcommittee meeting earlier this month, that we can also access those invitation lists and make additional suggestions, recommendations of who may be missing. But that just feels like a really important part of kind of the inclusion process. And then last step that will happen later this fall and into early winter is the prioritization process. And again, this is a huge kind of section or segment of work for this kind of updated CAP. The actions here being really relying upon the stakeholder feedback to revise the strategies. So not sort of doing it just as a matter of course or a feeling of wanting to be inclusive, but then actually taking that feedback and using the information to help revise the strategies. Another action is building time within your subcommittee to connect with the Climate Action Office public engagement team. So that could be having them attend a subcommittee meeting, or having them kind of review some of the key themes that they have heard, or issues, concerns that they've heard from the community engagement efforts that they have attended and summarized. And so the particular question here, again, you've seen this, it's not new, but again, relevant in this stage, is do the revised recommendations reflect and incorporate what you've heard from frontline and impacted communities? And if the answer is no, then the encouragement would be, how could you revise those strategies to be more inclusive of some of that feedback? And then these sets of actions are more related to the relationship with the Just Transition Subcommittee. And that could be, there are a variety of different ways, and we talk about this actually on the third page as well. So I'll kind of repeat it, or speak it here and then repeat it again. There's a variety of different ways that you all can utilize the resources and kind of passion and knowledge and representation that exists within the Just Transition Subcommittee in this stage of the process. And the first could be attending a Just Transition Subcommittee meeting and bringing questions that you have about various recommendations or strategies, or even just kind of overarching kind of opportunity for reaction from our Just Transition Subcommittee members around how this particular strategy recommendation feels to the members of the Just Transition Subcommittee. There's also an opportunity for you to bring questions. So it could be sharing recommendations or bringing questions that you have. There's the possibility of holding time on your agendas. And I think that this subcommittee has done this well. And this is where maybe I, as your liaison, haven't kind of supported you as best I could, of holding space on your subcommittee agendas for a just transition discussion. And again, the vision being that as your liaison, I would be accessible and available, again, to review recommendations with you, answer questions, go through some of the self-assessment questions that are most relevant. And overall, it's just sort of seeing both the liaisons and the subcommittee as available and accessible resources to you. And the kind of questions of kind of greatest import at this stage is really thinking about what metrics should be used to track the impact of these recommendations on affected communities, and really thinking about how are we going to know if the burden is lessened or increased as a result of the changes and the recommendations that are proposed in the plan. And then again, what processes were used to determine that the indicators of progress resonate with the affected communities and are relevant to their needs. And so there's probably, again, lots of questions and engagement that would happen to be able to respond to and answer any of those questions. And so then moving to page 3, which was designed to really be more of just like a resource page. So again, outlining the various ways that you can connect with Just Transition, engaging with me as your liaison, attending a subcommittee, reaching out to the Just Transition co-chairs, which is either Kelly Klein or myself, or our support staff, which are Carrie, Claire, and Sophie. And then just bringing to this process a real understanding that we're all learning this together. Our subcommittee also struggles through many of these kind of best practice efforts alongside you. And the biggest takeaway that I have learned from our Just Transition subcommittee is that our greatest failure would be by not acting. And so instead of feeling like if we do it wrong or we don't do it fully, that that's the failure, actually, my learning has been that the failure is actually not trying, kind of like a failure to act. I'll add one last thing, which is not related to this visual, and I don't know if Sophie has shared this or if you guys have talked about this at all, which is that Just Transitions and the Climate Action Office have been working with the Office of Racial Equity within the state of Vermont about coordinating a training opportunity. So there was a kind of equity training early on in the climate action planning process. So it's long overdue for us to do another training. And we're hoping to be able to, in the coming months, schedule a 90-minute training that would be available to all steering committee counselors, climate counselors, and subcommittee members. And again, the focus would be around how do we incorporate equity and just transition kind of language alignment. So we're kind of using similar terminology. So that's another kind of piece that the subcommittee, just transition subcommittee, has been working on. And I wanted to make sure that each subcommittee and the council were aware. All right, that's what I wanted to share with you all. Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you all.
Great. So thanks so much for that. That's a lot of information, a ton of work by the Just Transitions group that we really appreciate. Definitely can spend a little bit of time for any kind of questions and further discussion with Abby, and then we gotta move on after that. But Sophie, you got your hand up, so go for it.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. Just wanted to note that that equity training session that Abby mentioned, when it gets scheduled, will be eligible for per diem. The other thing that came to mind for me and the stage we're in, and Abby, maybe you said this and I might have missed it, but the stages that the documents organized by match up with the stages in the like process document. So that's how it's organized. But the stage we're in right now with the stakeholder meeting, something that occurred to me as we were talking through the invitation list is sort of the lens around landowners, and that's very important. And there's like a power, like, are we including people who do not own land, people who work on farms, people who work in, like, just having that sort of consideration as we're developing that invitation list to make sure that we're thinking more broadly than just people who have ownership or management authority over land.
I didn't say either of those things, so thanks, Sophie.
Thanks, Sophie. That's a great point. Any other questions or discussion for Abby or Sophie? This is a lot to digest. The document was shared via my email and it's on the website. So certainly, I think Abby is going to try to the extent she can to participate in our meetings going forward. So there'll be opportunities to kind of loop back with her with questions and certainly on how we use that kind of flow chart as we move forward in developing our recommendations.
Can I just ask like a general sense of those that were familiar with the original and still in existence guiding principles for a just transition? Does this visual feel more approachable, kind of clear as to how to use it in the process? Does this kind of remove some of the barriers of using such a kind of a complex and lengthy document, which was the original tool? Because if not, then we've not achieved our original goal and we should go back and do more.
I think it's helpful, Abby.
Yeah.
Sure, because I did get overwhelmed looking at the original recommendations. I feel like we should have had this like several weeks ago, so we could have been kind of planning it into today's discussion beforehand, because we just talked about the public engagement meetings, and I don't think we fully incorporated the aspects of what are required. Go ahead, Earl.
Yeah, I've lost my raise hand feature. I don't know where it is.
I see it there, Earl. Your hand's up. But yeah, we hear you too.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. I didn't do that. What I wanted to say is I'm on the Environmental Justice Network Steering Committee, and I'm also a member of Vermont Relief Collective. And what I can do is make sure they all know about these meetings and encourage participation for those that are managing lands or landowners, and, along with this outreach to the Beneke Nation Coalition for a meeting with y'all. But these other two meetings, I can try and wrangle the BIPOC network into it. We'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ro. That's like an example of the real importance and power of relationships and connections of kind of the networks that everyone's already either associated with or aware of. It's really, really very valuable.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with JL that I do think that this visual representation and kind of flow is much easier to kind of wrap your arms around and apply. And it's a good next step in the guiding principle. So thanks for the work in developing that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that it wasn't available a few weeks ago. I hear that it would have been valued in the kind of brainstorm earlier today. And yeah, I think that's just been a challenge we've all faced is like, how do we develop the resources and find the time while also adhering to kind of a pretty rapid pace of the process overall? So I know that, I guess, know that we have felt that pressure, and I am sure that subcommittees like Ag and Ecosystem that are developing and revising and prioritizing recommendations definitely feel that as well.
Well, as the last subcommittee to get our stakeholder meeting scheduled, I think we're living proof of that. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone. As I know, Judy would say if she was here, equity is considered at every step of the process. It should be the first thing that we think about. So, we'll keep coming back to how we make sure we use the information and resources that you've provided in our conversations and decisions in the future. So, thanks, Abby. All right. So let's do a little check here. We've got about 35 minutes left. We do want to pause briefly for any additional public comment near the end, though I don't see any public here. Mainly what I think we need to finish up with is just a check-in around the task group process, both on like timeline and kind of what we need to deliver by when, and then share any updates that the task groups might have or questions, because we really do need to get that process underway and ginning up some preliminary recommendations. Now we know we've got somewhat of a deadline in advance of those public meetings. And we also have to have some space to bring those recommendations back to the full group, since we've agreed that, all decisions for final prioritization will be made by the full group, not just the task group. So I know we've got Liz who joined us, Sophie's still here, Evan's hanging. So I don't know if any of you could kind of refresh us on the overall kind of timeline and expectations for the subcommittee and an extension that the task groups to deliver recommendations to the council. With that, first of all, is this a helpful way to use the remaining time we have subcommittee members to kind of like just do a quick refresh on what our responsibilities are, what the timelines are, and then to kind of talk in more detail about the task group process and make sure that's rolling? Good use of time. Okay, silence works for me. So can anyone from the climate office help just a quick refresher on timelines and expectations for deliverables?
Yeah, I could hop in with that. So what you're all working now in terms of the task groups, reviewing, updating, refining, recommendations for the update is right in this window to really be honing in on that. And then by the December council meeting, that's when we want everything in that template to be finalized to go to the council. And there's like an updated process guidance I'll send to you all, but that's kind of the time frame that we're working with.
Yeah, what is the date of that climate council meeting?
I'll check. I don't have it offhand.
Let's see. I can go to the calendar, so don't worry about it. I'll look it up. Okay. So I think, by some point in December, we're going to need to have our final recommendations formatted in the kind of template documents that Liz and others have shared with us. Between now and then, the task groups are going to need to kind of use that tool to look at the recommendations in the existing plan to kind of prioritize, modify, or add to what's in there to come up with a short list of recommended actions. We're going to need to bring that back to the whole group um, to basically come up with some final decisions. I don't see a climate council meeting on the website calendar for December, so that may not be scheduled yet. So we'll just assume it's going to be sometime in December, hopefully as late as possible. So okay, great. And Evan's kind of put the general goals for the rest of this month um, in the calendar. So in the chat. So my sense is that we basically have October for the task groups to kind of do their work, and ideally by let's look at our meetings. Ideally by like our first November do we have a first November meeting scheduled? Yeah, by our first November subcommittee meeting, which is the 7th of November, it would be great if we could start to look at the recommendations for the subcommittees at that time. So, excuse me, the task groups at that time. So, if the task groups could kind of do your work to come up with some prioritization in your areas of focus in advance of that November 7th subcommittee meeting, then I think we would have the rest of November and a little bit of December to work as a group to incorporate public feedback and our own thinking. If that November 7th deadline is too aggressive for the task groups, that's fine. And, let's talk about that. But just off the top of my head, that seems like a reasonable timeline to try to move this stuff forward. We have a meeting 2 weeks from today on October 24th. We've got another on November 7th and another on November 21st. That's kind of our current meeting schedule. So what if JL, thoughts on that? Others thoughts on what I just said?
Sounds good to me.
Task group leads, how's that feel?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think it's achievable.
Yeah. And again, like I don't think we need like a final, but just, if you're made some progress and it's ready to bring back to the group for consideration by that point in time, there's still a month and a half after that to kind of refine things, and we can always push stuff back to the task groups to work further, but just having at least an initial weather report by that November 7 meeting for the task groups would be incredibly helpful, I think. Others, thoughts, comments?
I'll just say it's good to have a deadline.
Yep.
We're probably a little bit behind, but we're working on it and trying to get together and working individually on a template. So it'll be good to know that we're aiming for that and do the best we can.
Yeah. And as I said, we've got another meeting. So that's about a month from now. We've got another meeting in 2 weeks. So if at that point people are just not feeling like that's going to work, we can have that conversation. But I think let's shoot for that as a meeting where we'd all come back and start looking at the work of the task groups. JL.
Yeah, can you guys just let me know when you're meeting, the task groups are meeting? Because I probably can't attend all of them, but I'd like to join a couple.
All right. Well, any other, so we've got a little bit of a plan. Task groups are going to work over the next month and try to bring something back for the full group to start considering on November 7th. We'll check in 2 weeks to kind of see how progress is going on that and whether we need to revisit that timeline. That will work well with the public meetings that following week in November, where we'll have hopefully at least some initial concepts of areas we're focused on to bring to those folks in those public meetings. Again, we'll talk about that in 2 weeks. We'll spend a good part of our meeting in 2 weeks on preparing for those public meetings. So we've got a process in place. Is there anything that we want to talk about beyond that, logistically, procedurally, or anything that the task groups are kind of experienced with challenges or kind of updates that you want to share? Or at this point, you're all just trying to figure out how to get together and work and move things forward, which is totally understandable. So I don't want to belabor this point, but if there are things that task group leads or members want to talk about or ask or share, we've got some time. All right. Well, we could certainly cede this time back to you all if you wanted to talk about, anything further logistically about task groups or just kind of go on with your days. So, I don't know. Any other thoughts, comments, questions people have, things we want to cover? All right.
Hey, Billy, can we just remind the task forces that there are a couple of us who are staff and more than willing to help and the task force leads may not know who we are or where we're supposed to be in this process. So
Yes.
please reach
Yeah.
out to us.
Thank you, Marley. Yeah, can you kind of just remind folks kind of where the two, I think Judson Peck at the Ag Agency, I think, has expressed an interest in supporting the task group number one, the greenhouse gas emissions reductions task group that Ryan and Alyssa are leading. And Marley, why don't you speak to your kind of interests and availability?
Yeah, I am happy to support the other two task groups if folks want to reach out to me for anything that you need. Um, I'm not sure if there's a particular one person lead for those groups. I've just got the general names. It looks like Jake for number two and Judy or Earl or Andrew, one or the other for number three. So just reach out and let me know what I can do to help. Same thing with Judson. But Ryan may has likely already talked to Judson.
Great. I'll put the kind of the list of folks in the chat just as a reminder, and the first two members listed are the leads for each. Great. Yeah, and I think Evan continues to be a great resource, available to help us out, and help any of the task groups out as needed as you get up and going. Certainly meeting via Zoom or Teams or in person is a great option, but also we intentionally structured these small enough that if you don't have the ability or the time to meet in person, just sharing emails, group emails, using the forms, the templates as a way to track progress and prioritization. That's all totally good to go for the task group. So if in the beginning it's easier just to kind of do an email exercise where you're sharing ideas around that way, that's absolutely appropriate for task groups. So, and if there's anything that Jael and I can do to help support your work, definitely don't hesitate to ask us either.
And Billy, they should all email Evan if they're still having technical issues with getting the partnership emails set up, or is
I
that?
think so, Evan, if you're still willing to be that person.
Of course, yeah. If anyone has any questions, I'm your point person and help get you logged on, or if it's just not working for you, just get documents sent like I did for Stephen.
Does everyone have Evan's email?
You should.
So.
I've emailed partner and personal, so not it's my first and last name at Vermont. Okay.
Okay. What else? Anything else you want to cover today? I know I've heard from Senja and Judy. Senja said she'd watch the video and follow up with any questions and is eager to kind of be part of the task groups as they start to move forward. I pulled together a few notes for Judy regarding the public meetings and the just transitions conversation that we had that I'm going to share with her after this, because I know those are areas of particular interest for her. And I'm sure Jael and I can follow up with her independently if there's anything she wants to discuss from what you missed today. But otherwise, I think we've got a good schedule in place. It's aggressive, certainly. But just a reminder, this is all the first cut, and the council is going to spend a lot more time with it. We'll continue to advise him as appropriate. So I think we do what we can do with the time and resources we have, and let the council take it from there. Any other comments, questions? Well, what do you think, Jael? Should we call it a day? And all right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks, Liz, Marley, Evan. Thanks, Abby and Absentia for joining us. And definitely reach out to Jael and I with any questions. Otherwise, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And now we all got a deadline to work towards. So thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.